Hey everyone, today we're going to take a little trip through my life. Yes, I'm Napoleon Bonaparte, and explore how I turned a small beginning into a launch pad for big ambitions. Corsica may have been beautiful, but it wasn't exactly the center of the world. Growing up there, I could feel the limitations pressing in, like the walls of a narrow street. But those walls only sharpened my curiosity about what lay beyond. So before you get comfortable, though their universe, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to my channel to support me making more great videos. Wherever you are right now, maybe it's early morning with coffee in hand or late at night when you should probably be sleeping. I'm glad you're here with me. Now, let's listen to my compelling story in this video. I was born in 1769, a year after Corsica had been taken from Genoa by France. That timing alone shaped my entire life. My parents were proud Corsicans, but they understood that aligning with the French system could open doors. They sent me to the mainland for my education, even though it meant saying goodbye to the only home I had ever known. Imagine being a boy with an accent so thick people barely understood you. That was me at Brienne-le-Château Military School. I was short, spoke awkward French, and had very few friends. But I learned something important in those years. You don't have to be liked to be respected. Instead of chasing approval, I buried myself in books, history, geography, mathematics, the great battles of the past. I was fascinated by men who had changed the course of history not by accident, but by willpower and strategy. I started to think, why not me? That question wasn't arrogance, it was a dare I gave myself. At 17, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. It sounds glamorous, but the truth? My early assignments were dull, and my uniform didn't fit well. Still, I treated every day as training for something greater. I learned the terrain, studied my superiors, and quietly took mental notes about what worked and what didn't in leadership. Then came Toulon in 1793. France was in chaos. The revolution had turned everything upside down, and I was given a chance to show what I could do. The city had rebelled, and the British Navy supported the revolt. The army needed someone to take charge of the artillery. I was 24, still relatively unknown, but I threw myself into the task. I reorganized the guns, found better positions, and devised a plan to break the enemy's hold. When Toulon fell, my name suddenly mattered. The Paris newspapers called me a hero. Here's the thing, success doesn't start when everyone is watching. It starts when no one notices, when you're building your skills quietly in the background. My years of study, my focus on precision, my refusal to be distracted by petty things, all of it prepared me for that moment. People called it luck, but I knew better. Luck is just preparation, meeting opportunity. Of course, ambition isn't a straight road. There were times when I doubted myself, especially in those early years. Sometimes the loneliness of being different weighed on me. But I learned to turn that difference into an advantage. If people underestimated me because of my size, my accent, or my background, it only made my victories sweeter. I didn't need to announce my ambitions to everyone. I let my actions speak for me. One of my favorite habits back then was keeping a mental map, not just of battlefields, but of my life. I'd ask myself, where am I now? Where do I want to be? And what's the fastest route? It's the same principle I later applied in military campaigns. See the whole field, not just the fight in front of you. By my mid-20s, I was already dreaming of reshaping France, maybe even all of Europe. But ambition without direction is like a cannon without aim. Dangerous, but not effective. So I focused on one thing at a time. First, earn trust. Second, win the battles in front of me. Third, never let comfort slow me down. Looking back, the real breakthrough of my early life wasn't a single battle or a single promotion. It was the shift in my mindset, from thinking like a subject of circumstances to acting like the architect of them. I stopped asking, what will happen to me? And started asking, what will I make happen? That change was everything. And if there's one takeaway from this part of my journey, it's this. Don't be afraid of small beginnings. They force you to think creatively, to use every resource, and to build a foundation strong enough to handle the weight of your future victories. Whether you're a young student, an entry-level worker, or just someone with a dream bigger than your current life, remember, the start doesn't define the finish. Because if a boy from a rocky island with an awkward accent could rise to lead empires, you can rise to conquer your own battles, whatever they are. Has a way of testing your spirit, and trust me, I've had my fair share. The newspapers love to write about victories. They make better headlines, but it's the losses that carve the deepest lessons. My so-called meteoric rise had its fair number of meteors falling in the wrong direction. One of the earliest and most painful setbacks came after my success at Toulon. I was riding high, promoted to brigadier general at just 24, when politics decided to remind me how fragile power could be. I had aligned myself with the Jacobins, the radical wing of the revolution, and when they fell from grace, so did I. Overnight, the brilliant young general became unemployed troublemaker. My uniform was suddenly worthless, and I was left wandering Paris with little more than my ambition and my pride. Those weeks were brutal. Paris in the mid-1790s was not a city for the idle or the unlucky. The streets were full of hungry people and dangerous rumors. I survived by clinging to discipline, waking up early, reading military reports, sketching out plans for campaigns that didn't even exist yet. You might think that was pointless, but here's the truth. Preparing in the dark keeps your mind sharp for when the lights come back on. Then came another humiliation. I was offered a command, but it was in the infantry. Me? I had trained my whole career in artillery. This wasn't just a professional mismatch. It was like asking a chess player to suddenly switch to checkers. I refused, and my refusal cost me the position. My friends thought I was reckless to turn down work, but I had a long-term plan. I knew that saying yes to the wrong opportunity can chain you to the wrong path. And yet, the lowest point came in 1795. The Royalists were threatening Paris, and the government was desperate. They needed someone to defend the city, and one official remembered the young general from Toulon. I was called in. In that moment, every small act of preparation paid off. I arranged my cannons strategically along the streets, using narrow passages to our advantage. The Royalists were crushed in a single day. Overnight, I went from unemployed to commander of the Army of the Interior. That turnaround taught me something crucial. Setbacks are not stop signs, they're red lights. You wait, you adjust, and when they turn green, you move with everything you've got. Of course, not every recovery is so fast. In 1798, after my successes in Italy, I launched my campaign in Egypt. It was ambitious, part military, part scientific, part dream of cutting Britain off from India. We had some early victories, but the desert has a way of humbling even the boldest. The climate was brutal, supplies ran thin, and the British Navy under Nelson destroyed our fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Suddenly, we were stranded. You'd think that was the end of the story, but here's where my philosophy kicked in. I didn't dwell on the loss. I reframed the situation. Egypt became less about defeating Britain and more about building influence in the region, spreading French science and culture, and keeping my troops engaged. Even in failure, I searched for a new objective that could still serve the bigger picture. I've learned that the key to turning setbacks into stepping stones is speed, the speed at which you shift from "this went wrong" to "what's my next move?" People waste years blaming others, replaying the failure, or doubting themselves. I preferred to grab the map, find a new route, and keep moving before anyone could write my obituary. But here's something I don't often admit. It's not just strategy, it's also ego. My pride simply wouldn't allow me to be remembered for a loss. That pressure, partly noble, partly vain, pushed me to work harder than anyone else in the room. I studied my enemies more carefully, trained my officers more rigorously, and thought through every scenario twice over. I wanted my name associated with resilience, not retreat. And you know what? People notice. Soldiers will follow a leader who doesn't crumble under pressure. After Egypt, when I returned to France, my reputation was bruised but not broken. In fact, my ability to survive the campaign with my authority intact impressed people. They saw me not as a general who had failed, but as one who had faced impossible odds and still come back ready for the next fight. Here's my advice to you, whether you're leading armies or just trying to get through the week. Treat every setback as training. Each failure strengthens a muscle you can't develop any other way. The embarrassment, the disappointment, the doubt, all of it is weight you lift, rep by rep, until you're strong enough to face something even bigger. I'll leave you with this. Life will test you, sometimes brutally. You will be overlooked, underestimated, and maybe even discarded. But remember, being thrown aside is not the end. It's just the moment when you start planning your comeback. And if you keep your ambition alive, that comeback might just be the thing that defines you. People often think my success came from pure charisma or the drama of my speeches. That's flattering, but the truth is far more methodical. I was a strategist before I was a celebrity. Whether it was a battlefield, a political chamber, or even the small personal choices of daily life, I treated every situation as a chessboard. You see, strategy isn't just for war, it's for living. In the Army, I learned that the first thing you need is perspective. If you're only focused on the skirmish right in front of you, you'll miss the flanking maneuver that takes you out completely. The same is true in life. If you're locked on today's crisis, you might fail to notice tomorrow's opportunity. Let me give you a battlefield example. In Italy, during my first major campaign as commander, we faced a coalition of Austrian and Piedmontese forces. They outnumbered us, but they were divided, each army operating independently. Instead of hitting them head on, I moved quickly to attack one group before the other could arrive. By isolating my enemies, I turned their advantage into a weakness. That principle, divide your challenges and deal with them one at a time, applies just as much when you're handling debts, projects, or personal problems. I also learned to use speed as a weapon. My armies moved faster than anyone expected, forcing opponents to react instead of act. In life, speed doesn't mean rushing recklessly. It means making decisions quickly once you've gathered enough information. People who hesitate often lose the moment entirely. I'd rather be 80% sure and act decisively than wait for perfect certainty that never comes. But strategy isn't just about attack. Defense matters too. Sometimes the smartest move is to dig in and let your opponent exhaust themselves. In life, this could mean waiting out a rival at work, letting a trend pass before you commit, or simply taking time to gather your strength before the next push. I learned this patience in the Siege of Mantua, where we waited for disease and supply shortages to weaken the enemy before striking. Another key lesson: control the terrain. On a battlefield, this means securing high ground, bottlenecks, and key supply points. In everyday life, terrain is your environment, your workspace, your schedule, your network. If you control those, you control the flow of opportunities. For me, even my personal relationships were part of the terrain. I made sure I knew who I could trust, who I could influence, and who I needed to keep at arm's length. Here's a little secret. I was never afraid to borrow ideas. I studied Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Frederick the Great, taking what worked and adapting it to my style. You don't have to invent every move yourself. You just have to understand how to adapt proven tactics to your situation. The same goes for you. Learn from the best in your field, then make their strategies your own. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But Napoleon, you commanded armies. My life isn't a battlefield. Oh, but it is. Your troops might be your skills, your time, your money, and your energy. Your enemies might be procrastination, poor planning, or fear. And your victories might be landing that job, finishing that degree, or launching that business. The tools are the same. Assess the field, know your resources, and act with precision. Of course, strategy also means anticipating mistakes, yours and others. I always ask myself, if this plan fails, what's my escape? In Egypt, after the disaster at the Nile, I already had contingency plans to keep my forces active and my political image intact. In life, that's like having savings before you quit a job or learning a backup skill before you need it. Contingency plans aren't pessimistic. They're the reason you survive. One of my favorite tactics was the feint, making the enemy think I was going one way while I prepared to strike elsewhere. In business, that could mean keeping your true goals private until you're ready to act. In personal goals, it might mean quietly preparing for a big change before you announce it. But above all, strategy requires self-discipline. You can have the most brilliant plan in the world, but if you can't control your impulses, you'll sabotage yourself. There were times when my ambition tempted me to act too soon, to take on too much. The victories I'm proudest of were the ones where I waited for the perfect moment. So, if you take nothing else from this section, take this. Live strategically. Don't let life push you from one crisis to the next. Step back, see the whole board, and make moves that serve your long-term campaign. Sometimes you'll charge, sometimes you'll wait, sometimes you'll retreat, but each action will be deliberate, calculated, and aimed at your ultimate goal. Because whether you're leading an army across the Alps or simply navigating your daily life, the principle is the same. The one who sees furthest, moves fastest, and acts with purpose wins the day. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't march through life alone. Even the sharpest strategy will collapse if the people around you won't follow your lead. Commanding respect and loyalty was not something I was born with. It was something I earned, battle after battle, decision after decision. When I first took command in Italy, I faced a hungry, ragged army. Their uniforms were in tatters. Their pay was months overdue, and morale was so low you could almost see it lying in the mud. They didn't care about lofty speeches or revolutionary ideals. They cared about surviving another day. So my first order of business wasn't to lecture them. It was to feed them. I reorganized supplies, cut waste, and made sure they saw tangible improvements in their daily lives. Respect begins when people feel you've got their back, not when you tell them to salute. I also made it a point to be visible. Many generals stayed far from the front lines, but I walked among my soldiers, spoke to them by name, listened to their grievances. If a man limped from an old wound, I remembered it. If another had a sick family at home, I asked about them weeks later. These weren't empty gestures. They were investments in trust. When people know you care, they'll march further and fight harder for you. Of course, loyalty is a two-way street. I protected my men fiercely, and I rewarded success publicly. After victories, I issued bulletins praising specific regiments, sometimes even naming individual soldiers. Recognition is powerful. It tells people that their efforts matter, that they're seen. I carried that into every leadership role I had, whether with troops, ministers, or even my closest aides. But commanding respect isn't just about kindness. It's also about competence. If you make bad decisions, no amount of charm will hold your followers for long. I studied every detail before giving orders: terrain, weather, enemy movements, supply lines. My officers knew that when I made a call, it wasn't guesswork. That reliability built confidence, and confidence breeds loyalty. There were also moments when I had to make unpopular choices. Discipline was essential. If a soldier deserted, punishment was swift. If an officer disobeyed orders in the field, they were replaced without hesitation. You can't inspire people if they think the rules are negotiable. Respect deepens when standards are consistent, even if they're strict. And then there's the art of inspiration. I believed in painting a vision larger than the immediate struggle. Before crossing the Alps, I told my men they were about to do something the world would remember for centuries. That kind of statement wasn't just bravado. It reframed their suffering as part of something monumental. People will endure far more when they believe they're building history. Interestingly, I also found that loyalty came from sharing in the hardships. I ate the same bread as my men, stood in the same rain, and often rode at the head of the column. Leadership is not a throne, it's a shared march. Outside the army, the same principles applied. In politics, I won the trust of key allies by proving my reliability and delivering results. I didn't waste their time with empty promises. If I said I'd accomplish something, I did it. Over time, this turned rivals into partners and partners into lifelong supporters. Now, let's be honest. Some people will never respect you. Maybe they envy you, maybe they misunderstand you, or maybe your goals simply clash. I didn't waste energy trying to win over everyone. Instead, I focused on the people who mattered most to my mission. If your energy is scattered trying to please the world, you'll please no one, least of all yourself. There's one last piece to this puzzle: knowing when to let people go. Loyalty is priceless, but blind loyalty is dangerous. If someone's values, actions, or ambitions turn against the mission, you must act decisively. I dismissed officers I once considered friends because the cause came first. It's never easy, but the survival of the whole depends on the discipline of the parts. So here's my advice to you. If you want to command respect and loyalty, whether in an army, a company, a team, or a family, start by taking care of the people you lead. Be present, be competent, be fair, and be willing to stand with them in both triumph and hardship. In return, you'll find that when the storms come, those same people will stand with you. Because in life, as on the battlefield, you may plan the strategy, but it's loyalty that carries the flag across the finish line. If war taught me anything, it's that the battlefield never stays the same for long. One moment, you're pressing forward under clear skies, the next, you're knee deep in mud with rain blinding your vision. Life works the same way. No matter how detailed your plan, the ground beneath your feet will shift, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. The only way to survive is to adapt. I've had campaigns where everything I expected turned upside down overnight. Take my 1812 invasion of Russia. On paper, the plan looked flawless. We had the largest army Europe had ever seen, well supplied and well trained. But reality doesn't read your plans. The Russians refused to fight pitched battles, retreating deeper into their territory and burning their own villages to deny us food and shelter. The further we marched, the more our supply lines stretched thin. Then came the cold. Not just cold, but a kind of cold that freezes your breath before it leaves your lips. I had to make decisions I had never imagined, abandoning positions, redirecting troops, and, finally, ordering a retreat that was as much a battle against winter as it was against the enemy. It was brutal. We lost men, horses, and equipment in numbers I'd rather forget. But even in that disaster, adaptation kept some part of the army alive. We reorganized on the march, adjusted routes, and made use of every scrap of resource we could find. Without that constant recalibration, not a single one of us would have made it home. Adaptation isn't just about reacting, though. It's about anticipating change before it arrives. I trained myself to watch for subtle signs, a shift in the enemy's movement, changes in the morale of my men, fluctuations in the weather. In life, you can do the same. Pay attention to the early signs of change in your industry, your relationships, or your health. If you spot the storm while it's still a cloud on the horizon, you have time to prepare. Flexibility also means being willing to change your own methods. Early in my career, I relied heavily on speed and aggressive offense. It worked brilliantly in Italy and Austria. But in Egypt, I learned that a slower, more deliberate approach could be necessary in unfamiliar terrain. Later, in politics, I shifted again. Battles weren't fought with cannons, but with speeches, alliances, and policy changes. Some people cling to one style their whole life. I preferred to have many tools and switch them as needed. Here's a truth you may not like. Adaptation sometimes means letting go of what you've built. I had to abandon entire positions, even carefully planned offensives, when the situation turned against me. Pride tempts you to keep pushing, but pride can get you destroyed. In life, that might mean ending a failing project, changing careers, or leaving a toxic environment. You can't start your next chapter if you're still clinging to a sinking ship. And yes, adaptation comes with criticism. People called me reckless when I moved too fast, indecisive when I changed direction, stubborn when I held my ground. But leadership isn't about pleasing critics. It's about surviving and moving forward. I learned to measure my success not by their approval, but by the results. One of the best tools for adaptation is imagination. I like to play out what-if scenarios in my head. What if the enemy doesn't engage here? What if our supplies are cut? What if the ally I'm counting on betrays me? The more outcomes I explored in my mind, the less likely I was to be shocked when reality threw one at me. You can do the same in everyday life. Think about how you'd respond if your plan suddenly fell apart. It's not pessimism, it's preparation. I also surrounded myself with advisors who weren't afraid to disagree with me. If everyone in the room nods at your plan, you're already in danger. Fresh perspectives kept me from becoming blind to my own assumptions. Sometimes their input saved entire campaigns. But the deepest form of adaptation is personal. I had to evolve not just as a commander, but as a man. The young officer in Corsica who dreamed of glory had to learn humility. The conqueror of Italy had to learn patience. The ruler of France had to learn restraint. Every stage of life demands a slightly different version of yourself, and if you refuse to grow into it, you'll be left behind. So here's my challenge to you. Stop thinking of change as an enemy. Think of it as part of the battle plan. Expect it, prepare for it, and use it to your advantage. Because the truth is, life will never go exactly as you've drawn it on the map. But if you can adapt, you'll find that even the roughest terrain can still lead you to victory. Summary and conclusion. From a small island boy in Corsica to the Emperor of France, my journey was never a straight march. In Section 1, we saw how humble beginnings can forge relentless ambition, proof that your starting point doesn't dictate your destination. Section 2 taught us that setbacks are not dead ends, but training grounds for resilience, if you have the courage to keep moving. In Section 3, we explored how strategy, the art of seeing the whole board, applies as much to daily life as to war. Section 4 showed that no victory is won alone, and loyalty must be earned through care, competence, and consistency. Finally, in Section 5, we learned that adaptation is the ultimate survival skill, because the world will change whether you're ready or not. Through it all, my philosophy was simple: prepare in the quiet, act decisively when the moment comes, and never let circumstances decide your fate. Whether your battlefield is a corporate office, a classroom, or your own personal challenges, these principles hold true. You don't need an army to conquer your world. You just need vision, discipline, and the will to keep advancing. So take these lessons and march forward. Face your struggles like campaigns, adapt when the field changes, and never forget that even the greatest empires start with a single step forward.